Hi, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Abhijit Bhaduri, and I have an incredible guest who represents an even more incredible organization. So today we have with us Roopa Kudva, who is the managing director of Omidyar Networks India. And Omidyar is a unique organization, and the method of investing that they do is actually aimed at, sort of if you think about India in various slices. There is the top, 7% people, who are earning a certain kind of money. Then there is 400 million, which is the next layer, and then there is 500 million, which is the next half billion, and this is the chunk. So we are going to get into some of the numbers, but broadly, these are people who together as a household make about $300 per month. That's the kind of money that they are talking about, and this is the segment that Rupa's business is all about, impacting that. How do we sort of improve their lives? So without further ado, I'm going to invite Rupa. Hey, welcome, welcome. It is
Thank you,
such
Abhijit.
such a delight to have you here with us. Thank you very much for agreeing to join. And I was just telling the people what a terrific opportunity it is to have somebody talk to you about about the kind of impact investing. Well, how do you guys define impact investing? What is your definition?
Well, I think even before the definition of impact investing, it is about the purpose of the organization, and we are an interesting organization. We define our purpose as investing in bold entrepreneurs who help create a meaningful life for every Indian. So we are essentially a social impact investing firm. We make both equity investments in early stage startups, and we make grants to nonprofits. And these are across a range of sectors. Some of the ones you're much more familiar with, like education or financial inclusion, but there are also many more white space kind of areas, whether it's be property rights or governance, citizen engagement, the whole digital society which we are all a part of, which is creating many more opportunities but many more risks as well. So these are the areas in which we work, and for us, I would say there are four things that really characterize our business.
Mhm.
What are these four things? Number one, I think, is the fact that we make both equity investments and grants. And that is pretty rare to find the combination of an organization which is, think of us as a blend of a venture capital firm and a foundation which makes grants. So that is number one. Number
So,
two,
if I were to just, just for my understanding, what that means is you give money in terms of a grant outright, and there is another situation where you may take a kind of a ownership in a startup. Is that a right way? Okay,
absolutely.
perfect, great.
In when we give a grant, you give out the money and you do not expect anything back. When you make an equity investment, it is like exactly what a venture capital fund would do. You would invest in an early stage startup in an initial round, and then you would invest in a few rounds after that. You would support the company in scaling up with strategic inputs, with access to networks, with governance roles on the boards and things like that. So that would be the model on the equity side.
So you said there are three or four things that you do. One was you said you make this combination. What are some
Yes.
of the other unique things about the way you operate?
The the next unique thing I would say is that we take a very broad view of entrepreneurs. So we define, if you're an entrepreneur, you could be from the private sector, which is an early stage startup. You could be from the non-profit sector, or you could be from the public sector. You could be a government employee, for example, or a government bureaucrat who's very entrepreneurial. And the reason we feel it is important to define entrepreneurship in such a broad way is because remember, we are working with some of the most difficult and chronic problems that we face as a country. And the solutions to these can come from anywhere. Why do we assume that they will come from one area or the other? And therefore, having that dual checkbook of equity investments and grants allows us to support entrepreneurs across the board. So we are agnostic to whether you are which sector you come from. So that's the second unique feature.
Okay.
The third unique feature is what you opened with, Abhijit, which is a very sharp focus on who we serve. You know, the moment you are very clear about who you're working for or who you're seeking to serve, your entire approach to your business model becomes very clear. So we are very clear that we are focused on India's next half billion. These are the 500 million people who are going to come online via their mobile phones by the year 2022. And this would have happened beginning the last 3 or 4 years, right? And
Right.
this population represents a population that traditionally has been underserved or excluded or even disempowered. And they are the population that you outlined, about 25,000 rupees a month. So who are they? They are your drivers, your vegetable vendors, your kirana shop owners, and your factory workers and the like. So
Sure.
they are the bottom 60% of India's income distribution. And we'll love to talk more and dig in more into this profile when we get into the conversation. But let me quickly mention the last one, and then we can take it in whichever direction you want to. And the last distinguishing feature is that we are very technology focused. We believe that tech can be a force for good. So we are very tech led in our work. Tech basically enables inclusion of the many instead of exclusivity of the few. And so it's a powerful force for change. But tech also comes with its risks. We have been all reading, there's been a huge raging debate about privacy in this country over the last couple of months in particular. But we work with both parts of tech. We work with good tech, and we also are very concerned about using tech responsibly. So these are the four elements. Let me just summarize. Number one is the dual checkbook, equity
Sure.
investments and grants. Number two is the fact that we define entrepreneurship very broadly, private
Okay.
sector, NGOs, government. Number three is who we serve, the next half billion. And number four is the focus on tech.
Okay. Perfect. So beautiful. I just like the way that you sort of summarize it because it's so helpful for me to understand, how the conversation is going. I want to sort of step, do a little bit of a backtrack and say, you were prior to this, you had a very long stint. Now you've been with Omidyar now for about what 5 years now,
That's
and
right. Yeah.
that you had a long stint with Crystal. And when you look at that stint, when you decided to leave, and there was you know, it was a publicly listed company. You were the CEO for a while at that. What was that transition like? I mean, how did you go about doing that? How did
Yeah.
you move into this role, and how did that happen?
So that's a really interesting question and a bit of a long story. So I spent 23 years in CRISIL, and I was the CEO of the company for the last 8 years of my stint there. As you rightly pointed out, CRISIL is a public listed company. We began life as India's first credit rating agency, and over the years diversified to become a global analytical company.
Hmm.
Uh, and so it was a company which played a pioneering role in India's capital markets and bringing transparency to the markets. And Omidyar Network India, as I just described to you, is an investment firm focused on social impact. And the two are very different. So how did the change happen and how are the two different? I think so the change happened because I love my job in CRISIL. I think it was, CRISIL was a child of the liberalization era. It was a very heady time for the country. We saw an expansion, massive expansion in economic growth and capital markets. The company grew really rapidly, made a big impact, built a credible brand and all of that. And it was great to be a part of that journey. Uh, when I turned 50, I realized that I'd already done this role for 7 years. I had 10 more years to go. And I felt that being a CEO of a company for 17 years is not good for the company and not good for me. And this was a good age for me to move on if I wanted to try something completely new and completely different. So when we made a public announcement, because we were a listed company, I had no idea what I wanted to do next. In fact, I stayed on for almost a year after that to manage the succession and the transition to the next CEO. And during that period, because it was public, my intentions to leave were public, a lot of people started contacting me. And most of the folks who contacted me were things I had heard about before. And I felt that, if I had to do any of these things, I'd rather stay on in CRISIL. And then when Omidyar Network called me, I had no idea what impact investing is. Didn't have much exposure to the NGO sector. All I saw was an outstanding team across the world. And I said that if these bright people have chosen to work here, there must be something really special about this place. And I kind of jumped in with both feet and a sense of adventure without knowing what it was. And what a contrast. And let me just describe the contrast to you, right? So moving from a corporate world to a world focused on social impact, moving from the so-called CEO corner office with all the trappings to coming and working in an open office, moving from an organization where you were leading 5,000 people to an organization where there are 30 people, moving from an organization where every quarter you had a report card. You had to publish your results. You knew whether you were successful or not. You had earnings. You had market share. You had all those metrics. To moving to a space where success can take decades and very hard to measure, which is social change. And finally, I think moving from corporates who had kind of arrived, or entrepreneurs who had arrived, to entrepreneurs who were just starting on their journey. And that, of course, is the opportunity to work with many, many really young people, the millennials, and now even the post-millennials. So it has been a kind of reinvention. These people, entrepreneurship is attracting the best minds in the country today. These people are hungry. They have very high ambitions. There's no fear of failure. And they are working on the issues that will shape and decide the future of India for the next several decades. And I think it's a really exciting space to be in.
Oh, absolutely. There's a very interesting question that Aditya Mishra has asked. It says that did the union budget, did that have any favorable provision for social impact businesses? So is there something that made things easier? And there's another related question which I want to blend into this, which is, where someone has asked that, what is the most important part of your previous experience that impacts the way that you manage your current role? Because in some senses, you almost voluntarily reinvented yourself, right?
Yeah. Which one do you want me to take? Which one should I take first?
The tougher one.
Well, let me take the second one first, which is that, what helped in the transition, really? I think, number one, a realization that it's okay to say, I don't know, and okay to therefore ask for help, not be afraid or shy of asking questions. Number two, I think what a job, spending 30 years in the corporate world, rising the corporate ladder makes you quite versatile. I'm equally comfortable thinking about strategy as I am editing a document, as I am deciding a lunch menu if there's a board meeting, right? So I think just the flexibility to do a whole range of things and be equally comfortable doing them, I think is important when you're making transitions. And the realization also that probably one doesn't realize how transferable skills are. I think CRISIL offered me the breadth of looking at almost any kind of sector, any kind of industry in India, although they were later stage and well established companies and not startups. But those skills, I think, stood me in good stead, really. And and I would say, in terms of anyone looking to make a change, there's never going to be an ideal time. So whenever you decide to do it, just jump in with both feet. Realize that your skills are transferable. Realize that people will help you if you ask for help, and there's no shame in asking for help, right? And I think that I find that people at Omidyar Network India for years on end in the beginning, I used to ask very basic questions, starting with what is daily active users and monthly active users, and explain to me how the non-profit sector works and things like that. So I just feel that some of these skills of versatility, taking the big picture view, the ability to move between the big picture and the detail, those are some of the skills that stood me in good stead when I made this transition.
And then if you were to sort of look at, if someone were to leave Omidyar and go into the corporate, what skills would they carry? Somebody who started with Omidyar and goes into the corporate, then how does that transition end?
I think the ability. I think the ability to take risks, the ability to look at the future with a lot of optimism and visualize the possibilities of what could happen. I think we have a phenomenal team in Omidyar Network India, which is constantly working at the cutting edge of what's next. So I think in a corporate world, it would be quite refreshing for the perspectives that someone would bring if they make that transition would be very refreshing. Now, whether they would want to make that transition is a different question altogether.
And there is another question which I think is a very interesting question, that in India there is a retirement age at 58, and now all human beings are living much longer, etc. Is that something that we should be revisiting? That is there an age at which people should retire, if you will, or is it that if their skills are usable, if they are valuable to people, they should just continue? What is your view? Because it's an interesting sort of scenario, because as I said that today is also a day when you've had the transition at Amazon, with Jeff Bezos quitting, and you have a successor being announced, Andy Jassy, is sort of taking over. It's a question that most organizations grapple with. Is it just as hard in the social sector, transition? Because you've done one when you chose. And let me just sort of put one little sub bullet on that, which is, when you sort of you may have hired someone today, you're really looking to have a view of the organization that you can see, let's say, in the next 18, 24 months. But this person's skill is going to be needed much longer, whoever has stepped into your shoes. How do you sort of make that assessment that the person will be the right person into that future, which could be very different from where things are today?
Right. So there are a lot of questions in there, and let me take a stab at it, Abhijit, and you tell me if I'm going off course. So the first one should there be a retirement age? I think no, as long as, I think you're right, human beings are living much longer. There's the whole issue of social security. India, we pride ourselves in India as having a really young population, which we do, but by 2050, our population over the age of 60 will be 300 to 350 million. So that's massive. So there's also the whole cost of social security for an aging population. And so I do think that people should work for as long as they are able to. However, there is also today a big change that is happening, which is the future of work is going to look very different. So the question is, will you have the skills and capabilities which are relevant for the next 10 years? And I think skills and capabilities are becoming redundant very quickly. So it means you have to constantly reinvent yourself. Younger and younger people are being able to accomplish far greater success. I mean, you look at the entrepreneurs today. I mean, people at 25, 30 are accomplishing much more than someone in my generation did at that age, right? So I do feel that the key really will be, yes, it's great if you can work. The key question is, how do you keep yourself relevant? And for that, it's all about upskilling. It's all about keeping abreast of what's going on. It's always looking ahead. That is not always easy. It makes people uncomfortable. It's not easy to keep acquiring new skills. So I think the answer is yes. And should you want to continue working for a long time, better make sure you're relevant. And therefore, I think that a variety of experiences is critical to building that longevity of a career. Initially, this may resonate with you. In the early part of my career, if I looked at a CV and I saw people had worked in 6, 7 jobs, it was actually considered a negative. Today, I think a variety of experiences is considered a positive, right? And I do think there's a reason for that, because the world is rapidly changing and you have to constantly reinvent yourself to stay relevant. Your question about was it about identifying? How do you identify a leader for the future? Was that your question?
Yeah. That, because the organization will go through a very different canvas, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now. So can you really make that kind of a bet on an individual?
I think the good thing is that the leader, while competencies, technical competencies, and other skills are evolving very rapidly, I think leadership teams are kind of timeless, aren't they? It is about able to work with people. It is about being able to look beyond at the next horizon. It is about being able to inspire people. It is about being able to set an agenda. It is about holding yourself accountable and holding others accountable as well. It is increasingly about being able to lead with humility. And I think a lot of these traits, you can actually groom in people, you can coach people, you can develop people, because, technical skills, everyone can build up. But what makes a leader? I think the attitude and the passion that goes into building a leader requires investment, mentoring of a different kind. And I do think, therefore, you can identify bright sparks at different stages in their career and support them in their own leadership journey by exposing them to situations that allows them to flex the muscles that enables them to build some of these skills.
Are you more partial towards women leaders, or no, you don't really worry about women leaders or male leaders, you just focus on leaders? How do you view this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think my own views on this have evolved. Uh, and let me speak about what my views are today, right? So I wouldn't say I'm partial towards women leaders, but I'm very passionate about the whole issue of developing women leaders and the fact that we do need more women leaders. I think I have benefited from being in the workforce at a time when the economy grew very rapidly, as we said, and it gave many women an opportunity as well.
Sure.
So there has been a lot of change. There's a lot of support for working women today, particularly in urban India. So all good things. The representation of women at middle management levels is growing, but yet we have a very long way to go. I think women leaders can play a role. I think the responsibility on women leaders should feel or own the responsibility of pulling up other women leaders. It is important for organizations to set goals on diversity, because if you actually set goals that this is what I want to do, you will actually go about achieving them. I used to be very skeptical at one point about this mandatory women on boards, etc. But today I've changed my mind because I believe that if you give women that platform, they actually rise to the occasion. One of the favorite stories which I like to tell is about a gram panchayat. They've started reserving sarpanch positions for women.
Yes.
And initially, of course, it's always the mothers and sisters and all who come into the roles. But there was the story of this woman who was the head of a panchayat on Republic Day. When she landed up to for the flag hoisting ceremony, she found there was no one there, and people told her that, oh, the men came and they hoisted the flag and they've gone back now. And she said, no, I'm the sarpanch. It is my job to do this, my job to hoist the flag. Please call everyone again and I will do it. It's a small example, right? But it's a great example that shows that when you put women in the position, they rise to the occasion. So I do think setting goals is important. Women entrepreneurs, I would say the women entrepreneurs we work with, there's no difference as far as their capabilities. They're extraordinary women. They have extraordinary capabilities. There is no good time for a woman to become an entrepreneur. Jump in and ask for help is what I would say. And I would also say, Abhijit, that as investors, we need to do some soul searching. We just don't have enough women in early stage investing. And globally, you will see that the investee profile often mirrors the investor profile. So
Sure.
you will invest in people from your networks, people who went to your business school, who went to your engineering school, and things like that. And for us to have more women entrepreneurs, I think you also need to have more women investors. So I do believe my views on this have evolved. If you had spoken to me 10 years into my career, I would have said, oh no, it's all about merit and that's it. And of course, it's all about merit. But I do believe that we have to focus on making women leadership happen and making women leaders successful.
Absolutely well said. Rupa, I'm going to now sort of, in some sense, change gears. So we talked about, what is specific to the Omidyar philosophy in terms of investing, the dual checkbook, etc., which you spoke about. We spoke about your own journey, coming into the leadership role, the transitions that we are sort of looking at, and then we spoke about women in leadership. I'm going to sort of move to this whole thing of when you look at, so I was reading two documents which are there on your website. One is the 2017 document which I did, where I was really fabulously well put together, and I recommend that all our viewers really go through that. I really enjoyed reading them. So just from the point of view of just outlining, I kind of made a note of a couple of things. If you will, bear with me. Some of the things that you are looking at when you are looking at investing in products and services that are aimed at people making approximately 25,000 rupees per month as a family, or $300 per month. If you're sort of looking at that, the whole question is when entrepreneurs come in, they want to monetize. They want to have exits. They want to monetize. I mean, not everybody is necessarily motivated by the business of doing good. Is there a distinction you make in that?
So first of all, I would say that two things are important to understand. Number one, the way you design a business
Right.
for the next $500 million, the way you design a product or a service, and the way you design a business model for this segment of the population needs attention. It is different from the way you would design a business for the more affluent population. And I will talk about that and give you some examples as well. The second thing I want to point out upfront is that our example at Omidyar Network India shows that it is possible to build businesses which focus on the NHP population, which can scale up well and can be valuable companies. And we have enough companies in our portfolio to establish that. I think we have over 20 companies which reach over 1 million people each and which have a valuation of about 500 crores. And I think that is really important. These are good markers because bear in mind that sometimes we invest in a company when it's only an idea on paper. So reaching these bench milestones represents significant growth, particularly after the initial phase of starting a company is loaded with pitfalls and risks and hardships, right? So if you're able to reach this level, and we have these 20 odd companies in our portfolio, which are one or the other, and some of them both. I think it's quite phenomenal. So let's go back to the first question of what does it take to design a business for the next half billion?
Right.
Now, I think we have to recognize that the next half billion are very different in profile from you and me. They are different not just in terms of their income levels, they are different in terms of their educational backgrounds, their language skills, their social and cultural context, and all of that has to be kept in mind while designing tech-led businesses for them. And just let me give you a simple example.
Right.
If you take the shopping cart symbol at an e-commerce checkout, right?
Okay.
We
That's
all
the
know
trolley kind of a thing.
that's the trolley where you go and then you complete your shopping and go to checkout, and there's the trolley. Now, the trolley or the shopping cart actually represents what was originally a very
Western.
Western shopping experience, where you
Actually,
walk into a supermarket, go to a shelf, take things off the shelf, put them into your trolley, wheel the trolley to the checkout and pay. Now, that is not the shopping experience of the next half billion. The shopping experience of the next half billion is you walk up to a Kirana store, you stand behind the counter, the shopkeeper takes things off the shelves, he helps you make a decision, he's having a conversation with you, right, when you're buying. Now, does this mean that the next half billion cannot figure out what is a trolley? Of course not. Of course, they'll figure it out. But think about it. If every little thing on the internet is so alien to their day-to-day lives and their context, the internet all of a sudden feels like a place like this is not for me. Add to the fact that everything on the internet is in English, right? A
yes,
language which is not their first language. And so, therefore, when you're designing businesses for the NHB, we had identified 7 barriers that people need to keep in mind when you're thinking. And these are things like, how do you make it easier for women to come online? How do you use more of local language? How do you have a UI UX which is tuned to their cultural and social context? How do you build greater confidence? I mean, the people ask questions that, will I lose my money if something goes wrong with my transaction? How do you build confidence? How do you make internet a safe space for women? So you have to address all these cultural and social barriers in the way you build your business model.
and when you think about these kind of changes that you're trying to bring, and you gave an interesting example of investing in an idea when it is just an idea on paper, and then it's grown to this huge size. Give me an actual example of a company which came to you as an idea on paper and is now sort of scaled to that kind of a place where it is making an impact on the next half billion. So, what would that be?
So a very very early stage, 2 companies I can give you examples of. So one is a very interesting company in your city, Abhijit, Bangalore, which is Bounce.
Yeah.
Bounce is the two-wheeler self-driven ride-sharing two-wheeler company. And today, just to give you a feel, if you ride a Bounce bike on a twin sharing basis, the cost per person is lower than that of a public bus in Bangalore. So
Wow.
that is how they are building an affordable model, right? Another very interesting example is a company called Pratilipi. Pratilipi is a self-publishing platform that allows you to publish short stories, long stories, novels in over a dozen Indian languages.
Yeah.
Now, it is again making the internet feel a lot more accessible for people who otherwise would have found language as a barrier. It is also very interesting that to see that the majority of women who write and read, of people, of users who write and read on Pratilipi are women. And so again, they've managed to create that whole user experience for whether you're a writer or whether you're a reader, which makes the whole platform user friendly for women. So these are a couple of examples of companies where we came in really early and which are building very unique businesses tailored to lower income populations, which have a very different context from people at the top of the pyramid.
How do you ever understand that life? Because you've not lived that life, have you? I mean, have you lived in any of the smaller towns, or what's been your own personal experience?
Yeah, so that's a very great question, and I think it's a question for impact investors. The proximity to those who serve is very important, and all of us actually come from, I think, pretty elite backgrounds in that sense. We've been fortunate to have been educated in some of the best educational institutions this country and indeed the world has to offer, right? So how do you really, can you even relate? Is a big issue for us, and therefore proximity, spending time on the field is important. As for myself, I grew up in the northeast part of the country. My entire life was in small towns of Assam and Meghalaya, so very different world, etc. But I do feel that today the good thing that is happening is that in the last 5 years, ever since I came into the space, there's been a big change. And the big change is earlier we saw entrepreneurs who came in basically from the IITs, etc., and from the big metros. Today, we are seeing so many of our entrepreneurs, Pratilipi, for example, or Doubtnut, another very interesting edtech company in which we have invested, where the entrepreneurs are coming from the small towns. And we do see that the entrepreneurs who come from the non-tier, non-metros cities, their ability to relate to the problem and their ability to come up with solutions to the problem with simple things like what kind of colors will you use? What kind of colors will
Give me an example of how that is different.
So if you speak to say Tanushri Nagori, who's the CEO of Doubtnut, and there's a very interesting video that she's just published a couple of days ago, so you can go and have a look at it as well. And she explained, she said, 85% of her students are the kids that they work with are from outside the metros. Parents are in professions like farmers, laborers, etc. 60% of their customers go to state board schools, which means their familiarity. So they use English, for example. All their videos explaining are not in English, they are in English. She says the colors we use are really bright colors, the kind of colors you would not use in an aesthetic, the way the aesthetics of in a metro for a different audience would be more pastel colors maybe. So you'd use very bright colors, you'd use very large fonts. So it's a very different look and feel, even to small elements of design. But it's very important because it makes the product and the service relatable to the audience and to the users.
Well, that's a fascinating insight. And why do you think the colors that are used are brighter, when it is for the next 500 million? What is the reason? I understand the bigger font, but why?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. That's a great question, and I should dig more into it. But I mean, if you and I don't want to kind of presume that this is the answer. I think it maybe also has to do with regions, etc. You see, for example, calendar art, or you see things like the clothes that people wear in deserts, which are very barren. So you wear really bright colors, and often a lot of populations here are lower income populations. So maybe it's because of cultural things like that. But I should clarify, I'm just hypothesizing here. I don't know, but that's a great question, and we should check with Tanushri what is the whole psychology behind the colors.
But I would agree with that observation that when you go to Rajasthan, for example, I mean the very bright shades of blue, red, yellow, all of that which is put together, potentially to stand out against that very barren backdrop. So maybe that's one of the things which they've gotten used to, and therefore it just makes it look more human. Potentially that may be it. But again, I am speaking with the ignorance of a city-bred person. But this is what I have observed when I travel through the interior parts of Rajasthan and some of the other states. But I want to sort of really go back to this very fascinating example I read about, and I've been wanting to ask about that, which is you work in some areas such as when you're talking about land records. So there is this whole project which was done in Odisha, if I remember right, where you used a drone to sort of really identify land holdings, and I've seen that video on the internet. So it's really um, fascinating. Just tell me about how that came about.
Yeah, that was, I think, one of the most inspiring experiences for me at Omidyar Network India. So, so why are property rights important? Why is it important for you to have a piece of paper that tells you you own your home or you own your piece of land,
Yeah,
right? Because property right, we believe, is a very important pathway out of poverty. And sometimes it can be an even faster pathway out of poverty than even education. I dare say that. And that is because the moment you have a formal title, you're willing to invest more in that property, and therefore it provides you a safe space to stay, a better environment for your children. Even in a slum, if you have a recognized slum and you have title to property eventually, there is a greater probability that you will get access to government services like water supply, electricity, sanitation.
sure.
If you own property, you can rent it, you can take a loan against it, you can monetize it. And so, therefore, the benefits of holding that title to property are immense. Uh, the government of Orissa made what we think what was an amazing decision, and they decided to give property titles to all urban slum dwellers in Orissa, and this was 200,000 families covering over a million people. How
Wow.
do you do that in densely populated slums? And
Hmm.
so we worked with the government and Tata Trust and an investee of ours called Transserve, which actually flew drones, which mapped out the slums, and you could see the the map of the slums, the borders of each person's property. People came together in communities after that, identified the boundaries of their piece of land, and something that would have taken this survey work would have taken decades could get done in a period of months because of the use of technology. And so far, about, I don't have the latest numbers, but I think 70,000 or 80,000 people have already been given titles to the land. I was there in Orissa a few years ago when the first person was given her title. And it was, I think, an immensely moving experience. And for me personally, I think there's nothing as inspiring to see tech working for the most marginalized communities and people to
Oh,
improve their life. So I
absolutely.
think that was quite a phenomenal experience.
Oh gosh, how I envy you for that moment. That to see. My God, I'm getting goosebumps just hearing you talk about it. In a similar way, you've talked about things like agri-tech, edu-tech. These have been very restricted, so far. And do you see that changing? Is there a change between, let's say, what you saw in 2017 versus 2021 when you look at that? Do you see that having made some progress? Because one thing I can sort of look at is access to data. Certainly, India's got the lowest cost of data all over the world. So I think that has happened, perhaps. But what about agritech or edutech?
Massive, massive progress in both areas. In fact, I think last year, 2020 was recognized as the year of EdTech in a sense, right? I think that you're right. A greater penetration of smartphones and low data costs have really accelerated the digital journey of the next half billion. People are becoming much more comfortable using the internet, much more familiar using the internet. Businesses are being built for them. And so, therefore, the adoption of the internet into purposes beyond the basic uses for videos or entertainment, but using the internet actually to improve your life, improve your access to aspirational and basic services, to improve your opportunities for employment and productivity. So whether it is health, whether it is education, whether it's getting a job, whether it is transportation bounds, for example, we talked about, all of that can now be enabled through a mobile phone, access to government services via mobile phone. And I think the fact that you have the enablers in terms of not just low data costs, which happened because of Geo coming in, but also the UPI, the Unified Payment System, and the India Stack, right from Aadhaar, which has really enabled India to have the lowest cost of money transfer anywhere in the world, I think. So you have the digital infrastructure that has come up that has made it easier. I think COVID has been a huge accelerant of people's digital journeys. The trends that were anyway happening have got accelerated because whether you liked it or not, if your child was at home and there was whatever fashion it was happening in, if there were online classes going on, almost overnight, both students and teachers learned how to use tech, and you learned how to kind of use online education and became familiar with it. So we really think that COVID has been a big driver of digitization of India and the adoption of digital. And going forward, I think the path to building digital businesses for the next half billion is actually accelerated. So that I think is one of the big trends that we are seeing. Whatever we thought would take longer will actually happen much faster now because of COVID.
So, if I were to summarize some of the things you talked about, I mean, you talk about the fact that using technology in the case of, let's say, creating property rights for the lowest serving population. Is this, something specific to India that we should be sort of finding more entrepreneurs coming in, okay, let me sort of ask a more coherent question. The question in my head was, if you had a choice, where should development start from the bottom of the pyramid, the middle, or at the top? And does it trickle down, or does it stay in that barrier? I mean, are there three distinct markets? What do you think?
I think there are, you need different solutions for each, and there is trickle down. Let me explain why. So there are certain areas where markets just don't function, right? Which is at the base of the pyramid, for example. And that is where we need grant capital. Remember the microfinance industry. Today, I think a lot of people talk about the IPOs and the huge financial successes that many microfinance companies have seen. However, many years initially, the sector was funded with grant capital. So I think in very nascent sectors, commercial capital will not work in the initial phase. You do need grant capital to support sectors like civic tech, sectors like legal tech, sectors like citizen-centric legal system, legal aid, things like that, right? Many sectors take time to develop because very often the problem itself is not understood. So for example, which is why we fund research. Now we all know Aadhaar is ubiquitous, for example. However, we found that beyond the headline number of knowing that 1.3 billion people have Aadhaar, there was very little next level of data and information about Aadhaar. Who is it working for? Who is it not working for? What is working? What is not working? Which is why we have funded any number of several research projects on Aadhaar, including setting up a digital identity research institute at the Indian School of Business, right? So you do need certain solutions, different solutions for different segments and different sectors depending on the stage they are in. However, there is a trickle down effect. Almost each of the companies that we invest in don't exclusively serve the NHB. They also have a proportion of their customers, initially high to begin with, who come from the upper income levels. And over time, the proportion of the next half billion in their customer mix increases because they tweak their business models to be more relevant for the NHB. With scale, they are able to bring down the cost of their product or service and make it more affordable, and therefore get in more NHB people. So we do see mixed income models. And in almost every company that we've invested in, you do see people who are not exclusively from the NHB. In some cases, you have NHP population in the customer mix as high as 80%. In others, it could be 20% to start off with. And on a blended basis for our portfolio, I think about a third of the customers are from the NHP. So there is that trickle down that you talked about, and that's a great point actually. Thank you for bringing it up.
When you look at hiring somebody for Omidyar, yeah, uh, what is that element which you did talk about this whole thing of greater risk taking, which I thought was a brilliant observation because is far less dramatic when you look at the organized corporate world. Is there a way that if today you were to become an advisor to a corporate setup, how would you increase their risk taking from based on what you've learned today?
Well, I think the good thing really is that everyone realizes that digital is disrupting their world. And so companies are forced to be very innovative. They are forced to move faster. And in fact, I think some of the big innovations that you've seen in India have come from big companies as well, right? So I think happily, I think people are recognizing that you have to innovate to survive, and to innovate, you have to take risks. So you can already see that shift happening uh, in many of. But I also think that uh, there are ways to consciously build a culture of innovation, and I think key in that is giving confidence to people that it's okay to fail. I think our whole corporate structures, etc., uh, so far haven't emphasized that enough. So whether it is by forming SWAT teams, whether it is by coming up with the higher risk projects which are directly working with leadership and therefore getting that quote unquote air cover, so to speak, there are many things that you can do to increase risk taking. But above all, I think it is for leadership to signal by behavior and tone that it's okay to fail, because without that, I think innovation and risk taking becomes difficult.
When you look at the way you spend your time today, yeah, if you were to just do a slice of your typical day, um, how would you describe the way that you spend that time and contrast it with the way you spend your time, say, when at Christmas?
So I don't know whether I have an answer to the time, but I think if I can tell you what I do, I think that itself will give you a sense of where I think the stakeholders are very different. So when you're the CEO of a public company, who are your stakeholders? There are internal stakeholders, of course, which is your employee, right? But the equation or the relationship with employees in a large company is very different. You have 5,000 people. There's no way you're going to be able to meet everyone. And our 5,000 employees there were scattered all over the world. We had a research center in China. We had a research center in Poland. We had a research center in Argentina. We had offices all over the world. So it's not going to be possible. And so the interaction internally on a more intense basis is with the immediate leadership team, right? And not so much with the, although you have, of course, a lot of CEO interactions and all of that. So there internally a lot of effort in succession planning, leadership development, people development, business reviews, meeting customers. I mean, I have to make it a point to meet 180. I don't know why we arrived at that 180 number, how that happened, CEOs or CFOs every year amongst our customers. So a lot of time when there's other stakeholders like regulators, shareholders. As a public listed company, you're all the time talking to your investors. Media was a very big stakeholder in a company like CRISIL, which has to go public with its opinion at least 20 times a day. There are 20 press releases that are published every day. So the range of stakeholders, and then government was a very big stakeholder because we did a lot of policy advisory and infrastructure development work. So I think, and then that was then outside India, there was a whole set of stakeholders which were our global customers, the investment banks. So that was my world over there, and you kind of divided time amongst all these stakeholders. At Omidyar Network India, we are 35 people. So all of a sudden, it's a very different story. I know everyone in the firm, and it is. We have a really high caliber team. I'm really proud of the team we have built at Omidyar Network India. Each one of them is unique, outstanding, and so I think each one of our initiatives pretty much they run themselves. My role in the firm is basically how do we bring our work together and how do we make the whole greater than the sum of the parts, which is what the investment thesis that you've talked about, for example. How do we think about our work? So the moment you think about our work as if you don't think about our work like I'm an ed investor or a fintech investor, but I am an investor who will make life better for the NHB, that you're constantly thinking about what next for the NHB, right? So I think a little bit on the strategy, bringing the entirety of our work and making the whole greater than the sum of the parts. A lot of time in evaluating entrepreneurs and businesses for investment. So there's a lot of time in investment related discussions internally, and then time on the field. I think we encourage everyone to spend time on the field for the exact reason that you said. Proximity and immersive experiences are really important to stay in touch with those who we serve. So that's how I spend my time today. That's where I spend my time today, and it looks completely different from what it used to in my past life.
Um, you know, when you think about building a team for Omidyar, um, and sort of and building a team, by that I mean that you're going to be investing in the company, you're giving a grant perhaps, yeah, so it's that community I'm talking about. um, what is the rubric in your head which you sort of go through when you're trying to uh, arrive at a go no go? Walk me through that process.
Yeah, that's pretty standard, right? It's about what's the problem you're trying to solve? Is the market big enough? What is unique in your solution? What is the moat that you have? Are you really serving the NHB? Are you mission focused? And most importantly, what kind of an entrepreneur are you, right? Are you able to attract talent? Are you resilient? Are you mission aligned in terms of really do you care about the customer that you're trying to serve, right? So it's not rocket science in the sense of what the rubric is well known. I think the challenge with early stage investing is really being able to imagine the possibilities of what the business could become and how it could get there. And most importantly, I think the ability to evaluate the entrepreneur, because no business ultimate ever turns out the way you thought it would turn out, right? It almost ends up looking like a different animal from the time you invested in. And sometimes it turns out to be a different business from the one you originally invested in. So I think the ability, therefore, to identify good entrepreneurs or a good entrepreneurial team is core to our work.
Rupa, I could sort of just ask you several more questions about, how you go about sort of keeping yourself updated and a bunch of other things, but we are totally out of time. And I must say that this is one of the first times when hearing some of the things that you've invested in really made me feel good, at a point of time when you're talking about the rights for property for the people in the slums. I really had goosebumps. And I just want to wish you and your dream team at Omidyar the very best for making life better for the next half billion. Because, at the end of the day, if we can't build a more equitable society, I mean, what is the value that we do to give back for the education that we have received and the privileges we have received? So I think to give that, and who better than you to do that? I'm so delighted.
Thank you, Abhijit. Very well said. I couldn't agree with you more. Also, very delighted that I finally had the opportunity to come and spend some time with you. I must say, I really enjoy your sketches. So keep them going, and all the very best to you.
Thank you so much, Rupa. It's been such a delight. I so appreciate your coming over. Thank you very
Likewise.
much, guys. Goodbye. And if there are questions which I can answer, I will go back and look at that. Likewise, Rupa, if you can just take time to respond to if there are any questions you think. Thank you once again. See you
Thank
soon.
you.